Hey everyone, my name's Chelsea and today I'm going to go over how to install your first Bindplane collector and send data to Google SecOps with that collector in our management interface. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do in this setup is navigate over to app.bindplane.com, which is the SaaS interface for our management console. You can see I've already got a few agents connected into my environment, but in this instance, I'm going to want to connect a new agent and set it up on a Windows VM that I've got that's hosted on GCP. The first thing I'll do is I'll hit Install Agent, and we'll choose the platform we want to install the agent on. There are a few different choices, but in this instance, we're going to hit Windows. Next, we should be given an installation script that we can use on our VM. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy this script over and I'm going to paste it into a PowerShell instance where I am an administrator. So as you can see here, I've moved over to my Windows VM, and to make sure no other instances of the Bindplane agent are running on this VM already, I'm going to run a short command in my admin instance of PowerShell. And I'll see that I currently don't have this Bindplane service stood up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste that script over that I copied over from the Bindplane management console interface, and I'm going to hit enter, and it should silently install as long as I'm in an administrator session of the PowerShell instance. So the next thing that I can do is I can go into PowerShell and run that command again, and you should now see Bindplane stood up successfully. So that's looking good. What I've done now is I've navigated back to my Bindplane management console, and you can see that the Bindplane agent or collector that we stood up in our Windows VM is active and connected to our environment. We can confirm this by validating the operating system, the platform, and the hostname that we set during the configuration process. What we also see is that there's no configuration file attached to this agent, so let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to hit Create Config, and I'm going to call this config Windows VM instance. I'm going to choose the platform to be Windows, and I'm going to hit Next. For my source, I'm going to be managing and sending Windows events over to Google SecOps. So let's choose Windows events as our source. And because we're going to be sending all of this content over to SecOps, let's choose raw logs. So SecOps will apply parsers prior to data ingest, and it's really picky about the format that it receives. So it's best to send raw logs when you're setting up sources for SecOps. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to first add a dev null destination, but then we'll go over the process of adding SecOps and configuring it properly to our downstream destination in our configuration file. So let's hit save here. What we'll see when we hit save is that we now have a configuration built out with the sources and the destinations that we set and any processors we add as well. What we need to do now is take that Windows VM agent that we created on our instance of our virtual machine, which was a Windows machine, and apply this agent to this configuration. We're next going to start a rollout so that these changes are applied. What we'll be able to now see in Bindplane is data moving from our Windows VM through our management console and then being transmitted to a null destination. None of the data that you're producing or collecting within that Windows VM is ever fully stored or managed by us. We just allow you an interface to visualize everything that's happening and organize your fleets at scale. So one thing that we can do is we can click on this processor node, and Bindplane will give us a snapshot of the data that we're managing with our collector. If we add processors, we'll then be able to go into the live preview view for these events and see all the changes that we've added. What we'll do before this, however, is we'll set up Google SecOps as a destination. Let's create a new destination and call it Google SecOps v2. The protocol that we're going to use for fast setup is gRPC, but in some instances, you might want to use HTTPS. We'll make sure that our endpoint is correct. This is the correct endpoint because I'm located in the United States, but depending on where you're located, this might change. So make sure to look out for that. The authentication method I'm going to set to JSON. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move over to SecOps so that we can get the right credentials to input into our destination. Now that I'm in Google SecOps, what I'll do is I'll grab my customer ID and I'll copy this over and I'll add it into the destination. In order to get this credentials JSON object, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to collection agents in SecOps and I'm going to download the ingestion authentication file. After I've downloaded that file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it in my code editor or platform of choice, and it should look something like this. And we're going to copy over this entire JSON object, and we're going to put it into our SecOps destination. So I'm going to go over to my Bindplane interface again and show you how to do that. Now that we're back in Bindplane, I'm going to take that JSON object, and I'm going to paste it directly into this credentials input field. For my fallback log type, because I am sending over Windows events, I'm going to use the supported log type documentation page that Google provides, and I'm going to make my fallback log type winevtlog XML. Oh, sorry, I meant winevtlog, and that's just for my particular use case. What we need to do next is we need to go into the Bindplane interface, and what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect our dev null source, and we're going to instead hook our Windows event source up to our Google SecOps destination pathway. So as you can see here, I added a connection path that leads all of the events I'm producing over to both SecOps and dev null. But what we can do is, because we're no longer using this dev null destination, is we can delete it. So here we'll see that we now only have that Google SecOps destination, and we're going to hit start rollout. The next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to standardize the events that get into Google SecOps. And by that, I mean that Google SecOps wants to ensure that it knows what types of logs it's going to be passed. And it also needs these events to ideally be batched. So let's do that now. What we're going to do first is we're going to go into this node and we're going to add a processor. And we're going to look for the SecOps standardization processor. Because these are Windows events, the log type that we're going to add is going to be what we saw previously defined as winevtlog. So we're going to copy this over from Google's documentation. We're going to go back to our Bindplane interface and we're going to paste this into our log type input field. The namespace we can just call Windows VM namespace 2, and we're going to say OS type. This is just so that when we get into Google SecOps, we can look for this key value pair or this namespace in order to ensure that our logs have properly been sent over. So let's click save here. And then what we're also going to do, which is recommended to us in Bindplane already, is we're going to add a batch processor to the Google SecOps telemetry data that we're managing here. So let's view this processor first, and we're going to keep all of these pre-configured recommendations. But if you need more information on what you should be setting here, make sure to reach out to your customer success team or your sales engineering team. So let's accept these defaults and save all of the changes that we just made. What we'll do to apply those changes to our agent is to roll out the changes in our environment. So you'll see those events were rolled out and there are no apparent errors. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to double check that everything is visible in Google SecOps. So within SecOps, we're going to paste that namespace into the UDM field of values, and we're going to hit enter. And now we should be able to see it pop up. And this lets us know that our data is getting into SecOps and is being parsed correctly. Hopefully this video was helpful, and if you have any other questions about how to set up Windows events with SecOps or Bindplane in general, reach out to your customer success team or support@bindplane.com. Thank you.